Donnie Maib, welcome to the Soccer Queens podcast.
Thanks so much, Erica. I'm excited to be on, and I appreciate you inviting me.
So I know this is called the Soccer Queens podcast and you work with a variety of other sports at University of Texas, but this podcast is all about empowering female athletes, and everyone who comes on just discusses how they're building strong girls and women. And you're the perfect person. You've worked with female athletes for well over 2 decades. You have daughters who play sports themselves. So this will be really fun. Now, for the listeners who don't know who you are, why don't you explain your coaching journey and who you're working with today?
First and foremost, I grew up in Tennessee, so I'm a country boy at heart. So speaking of women, I've had all sisters growing up, so I've been around young women, older women as well as I've gotten older myself. So I've had sisters my whole life. Played football at Georgia for like 4 years. I've redshirted, played 5 years. My first coaching job was at Colorado, University of Colorado at Boulder. Again, my first teams, a lot of female sports there. I had volleyball, soccer, tennis, track and field. So a lot of influence there, learning from them. 4 years there at Colorado. In '98, we moved here. And again, first teams I picked up here, I worked with football, but I had female teams here and have been at Texas from 1998 till currently. I've kind of worked my way up. I'm our head coach for Olympic sports. I'm our director here, and still work with women's volleyball here and men's tennis. So it's gone by fast, but it's been a great journey, and I still love doing what I do. So it's good.
So let's talk about the volleyball team from this past year and some of the things that you focused on with them leading up to the national championship. And major congrats, by the way. It's just such an amazing accomplishment. It's so hard to get to that level. And I'm just really curious how these girls were training and what were you really focusing on?
Yeah, it's good question. And again, thanks for for saying that. Texas volleyball, obviously, anybody that follows sport, or especially volleyball, knows Texas volleyball they're definitely a great team. Coach Jared Elliott has built that program when he first got here, and have been privileged to be a part of his staff for over 20 years. And I would say, the biggest thing about training that team, and this kind of again speaks directly into training women to be high performers. Number one, it takes a village. I know that's a kind of a cliche saying, but at Texas, we do have the resources. There's me, we have an athletic trainer, we have a nutritionist, and a sports scientist. And I can get into the weeds of some of that in a second. But it helps to have people in different roles because every one of those young ladies have different needs. They all have different nutritional needs. They need to be trained differently. They heal different from injuries. They receive differently from different coaches. And so the more you can have some diversity, not only in your thought and processes, but the team that you can put around one female athlete makes a huge difference over time. I would say, on a high level, what we do consistently with those girls is that they train consistently. And that starts with Jared Elliott at the top. He is bought in and supports me fully on what we do in the weight room. So he's on board. Our sports med, athletic trainer, Deanne Kaler is on board. And those are your two big pieces. I've seen teams where the head coach doesn't believe in lifting and the trainer doesn't believe in it, but the strength coach does. That does not benefit the female. And so you've got to have those people in place that empower you to do your job at a high level. So I've got that support and trust from my staff. And so that's, again, I can't say it enough. I've seen athletic trainers and strength coaches not get along, and it goes down south really quick. And the athlete pays the price. So that's at a high level of administration and how we run stuff. On a programming, you start kind of go the next level down into program and prescription. We just lift consistently. And the only way I know how to say this better is that women need lean mass. They need, and I like to call it, we're going to put some armor on you. We're going to build some armor. When you're talking about a power sport where you're jumping and landing consistently, with all different torsion and vectors of force and speeds and kind of out of balance. Like if they don't have enough muscle mass around the ankle, knee, hip, back, they're going to get hurt. That sport already beats them up bad enough because they play so much year round. So the more lean mass we can get on them, the better. That I can't believe we're still facing that myth today. Well, if I lift, we're going to get muscly. I know we posted some lifting videos right before the tournament, and some of the comments in social media like, "Don't get them too muscly." I'm like, that's such a myth. Like, number one, the way that we train, we're not training for like lean to put like a ton of lean mass or bodybuilding. We're training for them to be resilient and robust in their sport. And so I think of it like a multivitamin. Like if you just take a little bit each day, we're gonna get a lot more out of that if we just do it like every once in a while. So that's kind of our approach and philosophy. We're gonna train 2 to 3 times a week, small doses, and be consistent in that.
Isn't it sad that we still get some of those comments like, don't get too bulky, or, oh my gosh, she has so much muscle on her. And for the level that you're working at, a lot of those girls are serving the volleyball at such high velocities, and they
Right.
need to have that power in the engine. So have you had issues like getting some of the incoming freshman girls to buy into the weight program? Did they do weights in high school? Like, what's the situation now that we're in 2024?
You know what I've seen, again, this is coming from 4 of my daughters that are they're all grown and in college, from the club sport landscape, right? Club sports today, they do so much of overdeveloping girls, I feel like, at their sport, but they don't develop them physically, strength, power, coordination, balance, working on postural type stuff, being able to brace. And so you get girls coming in here. Sometimes I remember we had one of our girls, Breon Butler. She was an All-American middle force as a true freshman. This was many years ago. She could touch almost 11 feet, but the kid couldn't squat down with a kettlebell to save her life. She was like Bambi on ice. She was so weak, unstable, but she was very elastic and gifted genetically and could jump really high. And so, you see it that these girls come in here, and it's kind of a disservice to them. Man, if they could spend just even a little bit of that time in their club, not always just doing individual private lessons and going to these long tournaments, just developing some physical capabilities so that they could play the game at a higher level and be healthier down the road, that would be better. Because we literally have had girls coming here with ginormous stress fractures from just playing too much sports and just not physically adapt to handle the stress and demands of that sport once they get here. And so they're just not ready for it. And oftentimes, Erica, what we see, you've got to go back and fill in some of those buckets that don't have anything in them, right? And whether that's strength, lean mass, explosiveness, balance, overhead strength, shoulder strength. A lot of kids are just so bad posture. You got to fix some postural stuff. So a lot of times you got to go back and like fix and repair stuff before you can move forward, which kind of slows it down, but it's worth it every time.
You make such a good point that a lot of the younger girls are foregoing the strength training just because of the sports schedules. And it's the first thing to go when season starts. Oh, we have too much volleyball, or we have too much soccer. We're just going to take 3 months off from lifting and kind of regress a little bit. And I remember when I was on your podcast, which was super fun last month, you made such a good comment. You said that at the younger ages, they're basically playing a year-round schedule that is actually meant for 18 to 24-year-old women. Can you expand on that a little bit more and why that's dangerous?
Yeah, I think what's just to kind of be clear, the club system is about the money draw, getting the parents to buy in, right? So you create basically you take a pro system and you start creating like this, let's again for a lack of words, like this is a basic level, this is a intermediate, this is advanced, and then this top level up here is elite. And so when you get to elite level, the way they structure it, that elite level, it costs more to be in that elite level as an athlete, as a club sport athlete. Um, you're going to practice more. You're going to play more tournaments. You're going to get more exposure. So it's more of the sport, right? And it's not looking at the long-term picture of what would actually help that young lady be successful, 3 to 5 years from now. And so they put them in this. And so the way it works is because high school club volleyball seasons from August to like November, club season starts right behind that. So from August to November is high school. Club waits till that's over. They start all their tryouts and stuff uh, November, and they get all the way through June and play. I mean, we had kids last summer, Erica, that were in here for some of our camps. They just finished their club season, their national championship in club season, came here for a camp, had a week off. They're going to go back for high school tryouts. There was no time off. And so that to me is like that's a system built for grown women. The younger the kid, the more there should be less keeping score. There should be more play time and fun time, not competition and trying to develop like specific skills. Because dude, if all you do is the same thing year round, it's like a video game button. I'm just hitting the same button. And if I keep hitting the same stress, that is going to break really fast. And so I've got to change up those stimuluses and those stressors throughout a cycle of training and to keep them healthy and to keep them developing. And so you've got a professional elite system for women they've brought down to these younger kids to create more pressure, more exposure, and more money and buy-in that they start doing from 12 all the way up to about 16 or 17, man. These kids are training like Olympian athletes in their sport. So they're overdeveloped in their sport, but they're underdeveloped physically. It should be flipping. We should be developing them physically and letting the sport kind of catch up to that later on.
Now, are there any girls who are coming into the volleyball team as freshmen who have a lot of these athletic qualities? And what are some of the qualities that the coach is looking for that you notice in some of the best players on the team?
Yeah, it's rare in volleyball. You'll have some girls come in, they've had a base of training. If usually what you end up seeing, the parents end up being the manager of this athlete, this young lady. They're the parents, but they're like a pro manager, honestly, because they're scheduling flights, hotel rooms, training sessions, not nutrition. It's overwhelming. But the girls that seem to be the most prepared are the ones that actually take interest in what they're doing. They get them a strength coach, they get them a nutritionist, get them eating good, teach them good habits, and just get a foundation of just training physically. I always say the 5 things that they need to learn how to do. They need to know how to squat. And when I say squat, I don't mean put a bar on your back. That's not what I mean. Can you squat properly? Can you hinge properly, right? Can you press properly? Uh, can you brace properly? Can you carry? Can you pull? Like there's like 5 basic components that if kids have just stopped doing it because PE is going away completely. And so kids are not outside playing anymore. So if you can just do those 5 kind of buckets, I call it, and build that capacity on those kids, they're going to be more athletic when you get them. Because you build a bigger engine with these kids and they're going to be more robust. They're going to recover better. They're going to jump higher. They're going to absorb when they land. They're going to change direction, less injuries. They're going to recover fat. There's so many good benefits that come from that. But just having that foundation is going to be huge.
So, with those movement patterns, what are some of the most common exercises you're doing with the team? And how is that translating to some of like the more power explosive movements? Because I know a lot of athletes want to become explosive. I get a lot of questions from soccer parents. How do we develop that explosiveness, that first step? And the weight room usually is the answer, but what are some of the exercises for that?
Well, I'll tell you this, it's not box jumps. I know everybody's like, put me on, I want to jump higher, put me on a jump program. Like, yeah, when you actually study jumping, you really need to be able to absorb a certain percentage of your body. Depending on the size of the jump, you can they've done research up to 2.5 times your body weight in your legs when you land absorption, right? And that's extreme. That's probably off a real high box. But I would say squat patterns, meaning can you just do a basic like dumbbell goblet squat with like 5, 10, 15 pounds? Can you keep your, can you keep your back flat at an angle? Are your hips mobile and ankles mobile enough to actually sit in a hole and not round and have that little butt wink and kind of strain your back? And so the way I like to do it, Erica, is like if you can't do that, then I would regress you. We would go to like probably like a suspension trainer back squat where you're hanging on to some TRX bands or maybe even just a rubber band and squatting with some assistance and developing that. So it depends on how weak. We could do a Swiss ball against the wall squat. We could do weights with that. So there's different variations depending on any limitations I may have, but just a basic goblet squat is huge. After that, can you do a single leg squat? And there's so many variations. We can do a suspension trainer with that. We could do an elevated single leg box squat. Again, working more on the tempo of squatting down, the eccentrics. So single leg squat, again, variation, I can regress or progress them. Uh, if you can't even do a single leg squat, start with box step ups. Just start with a low level box step up, slowly weight that, get stronger. And as you do, you progress your depth on it. So single leg work. From there, simple things. Can they brace? How long can you plank? Right? Can you do a prone plank? Can you do supine position, laterals? Right? Can you plank in all four directions and hold for time? Because if you don't have pillar strength, then you can't connect any kind of like strength I have up top will be not connected to my lower body. And what they have found out, we call it inner tube strength here, that if you can't create pressure in your abdominal wall, then I can't drive through my feet, change direction, jump. If I can't create pressure in my abdominal wall here, front and back, right, and sides, I can't push, I can't throw, I can't hit, I can't pull, I can't do all that stuff, rotate. And so, man, just the basic being able to hold a plank for like 2 minutes. I mean, how many kids can go 2 minutes? If you can't hold a plank for 2 minutes, why are you doing crunches and all that other stuff? That stuff's going to blow you up, make you terrible, right? So just the pillar strength, and then just I think upper body stuff, any kind of pressing. Push-ups are pretty hard and extreme for females at first. So you can start off with like any kind of like elevated bar push-ups where you're not putting all your weight in there. You can do it on your knees, but I don't like that because it kind of changes the mechanics of it a little bit. But there's ways you can do eccentric push-ups where you have a girl lower herself for time and then you have a band to help pick her back up. So building that eccentric strength in push-ups is going to be huge. Trying to think. And then hinging. You got to learn how to hinge. Single leg and bilateral. And again, you would be so shocked if you can't squat and you can't hinge, like why are you even doing the sport you're doing, right? Because those are so fundamental to transfer to sport training will be huge. But again, I start with single leg, just dowel rod hinges or with the foam roller. No weight. Can you stabilize? If they can't do it weighted or with just little implements like that, use assistance, use a table, use a bench, something to stabilize you until you get stable enough to do it. So little things like that, slowly kind of bring them up to speed, then start slowly weighting and progressing that. And then once you build a foundation, they take off pretty quick usually.
It sounds like even at that level, you're making sure all the girls get those basics down and have movement competency before they can start doing the quote unquote cool stuff. And you're so right about box jumps. There's like this obsession with them to develop power. Now, are you not a fan of them because a lot of athletes like butcher them or they're not getting enough hip extension, or they're better exercises that you use for power development?
Yeah. So the thing with box jumps, here's what I always like to tell people. What is your objective? Like, why are you using that? It'd be like if I was to come over and have dinner with you and your family and, you said, hey, go over there and we got the hams coming out the oven. Could you imagine me going over and grabbing a butter knife to do that? You go, Coach, where are you from? Like, that butter knife ain't going to cut none of that ham. And you would go over and grab a different tool Like this is what we use to cut ham. If we use a butter knife, we won't get the ham till probably next week. And so you got to ask yourself, like, why am I prescribing this exercise, right? And so usually for me, for box jumps, I use it for potentiation. I'm not using it to try to get them to jump higher. So what I mean by that, right, or some people call it French contrast. So if we do a strength movement that's really slow, I want to add a box jump component where we're doing a strength movement with a speed movement. And you're going to get a higher CNS activation. Again, it doesn't even have to be that big of a box jump. Just the fact that you're being more ballistic with your lower body than you. If all I do is train strength but never do anything explosive, kind of following up with that, there's not. You kind of lose that transfer of training. That's where they're all switching. A lot of people have gone to the velocity based training where you're actually measuring the implement you're using. And so that's where that a lot of that's coming from. Strength work is really good for a season of your training, like your first couple years. But at some point, you've got to add some kind of, whether it's a box squat, a band assisted squat jump, something like that, where you're doing something heavier and then something really light and fast, where you're coupling that for multiple sets. So I like to use box jumps.
Yeah, that's such an important point because I think everyone is saying to girls, yeah, like do your strength training, but they're also forgetting about those like really fast, twitchy movements to really translate that to sport. Now, are you doing a lot of Olympic lifting, med ball work, kettlebell swings, anything along those lines for power development?
Yeah, here's my kind of what I've learned for 30 years, and you'll get so much controversy on this, which is fine. Well, if you don't Olympic lift and you're really not training, or if you don't squat to full depth, that's, you're compromising and you're not really a good coach. I just, I have this saying, I don't know if you ever watch Star Wars, but there's a saying out of the Star Wars, kind of the whole saga of Star Wars, but only a Sith will think in absolutes, right? So what that means is a Sith Lord was a Dark Lord that they thought in black or white. And so what I've learned in our profession, Erica, is if you tell me there's only one way to train this athlete, I'm running the other direction from you, because I don't care what you say, there's so many different ways to train athletes. And I have found that some athletes really respond well to Olympic sports, or Olympic lifts, but you know what? A lot of athletes do not. There's so many parameters that go into Olympic lifts. One, can you teach them well and proficient? Two, how many contact hours do you have? I train volleyball with Olympic lifts, but my tennis team I don't, because I don't have as much time with them. And those guys they have mobility issues more than my women's volleyball team. So there's a lot of kind of things you need to kind of evaluate depending on what system and style of training. So I do like Olympic lifts, but I don't have to have them. I can use trap bar. That's a lot less coaching. There's a lot less restrictions in the knee, hip, ankle, and lower back. There's a lower risk, but a high return. So I could use trap bar. I could also use a safety squat bar. I like kettlebells. You know what? I've had girls where I just use sled drags on different exercises, and their legs get stronger and we stay healthy and they get better at their sport. And so I kind of think through the way I kind of look, it's like three circles. This is how I would say the easiest way. Like we've got about, in that first circle, it's small. You've got about 2 to 3 athletes. They really can't use a lot of your traditional type training exercises, right? Then that next circle is just a little bit bigger. I'll have 5 to 7 in there. Maybe they're not doing Olympic lifts, but they're doing trap bar. They're doing, some rear foot, single leg elevated stuff. Maybe they're doing more goblet squats, right? And then that big circle, I may have the biggest group, right? Those girls have no problem doing the lift. There's no, they don't have any injuries, any asymmetries, imbalances. Maybe something they did in club or early on, their shoulders kind of labral tear or something. No, those girls are really healthy. They don't have any restrictions. I throw the kitchen sink at them. So again, small circle, 2 to 3 athletes. Bigger one, that's kind of the middle of the range, and maybe that's 3 to 5. And in that big circle, there's no restrictions or modifications. And that's how I train my teams. And man, it just works. It works good. If I get too far outside that circle, they start getting banged up in the weight room. I have to bring them back. And so just finding those right zones of training and styles of training and exercises that keep them healthy to be better at their sport and keep them available. Early on, I train athletes and they'd get hurt, couldn't play. They'd get hurt in the weight room or something, couldn't be in their sport. The coach gets so mad at me. So, man, I want that coach to be happy. I want the girls to believe what I'm doing. I want them to be available to play their sport. And then we all are way more successful when we do it that way.
I think a lot of people would find the Olympic lifting conversation controversial, but it is true. There's a lot of context around that, and it really depends on how much time you have with these athletes and just how they respond to it. And I've seen coaches post on Twitter their athletes Olympic lifting, and I'm like, oh, that form is like kind of not good. And sometimes I feel it's just for show, like, oh, we're doing Olympic lifts and it looks cool. And it's not always the best exercise for that individual athlete. And there are so many ways to develop power without them moving that bar fast. There's so many other modalities that work well. So that was really good. Now let's shift gears from the physical to the mental side of the game, because I'm just really curious, what was the difference with this national championship team mentally, and what were some things you were doing with them on that end of things?
In a nutshell, the team this year, volleyball, Texas volleyball has always kind of been everybody's always out to beat them. And like, you guys are great. You're going to be number one. This year was different. It was interesting. This year, everybody kind of said, you guys won it in 22. You're not going to win it this year. And so they were picking us. And I say these, some of the sportscasters and they do all the social media were picking us to get beat, like in the Sweet 16. And our girls weren't hearing that. They're like, what? And so they just took it in a way like, you know what? We're going to keep a chip on our shoulder. We're going to embrace that nobody's picking us and they're overlooking us, and we're going to work our tail off and we're going to get locked in. And dude, that's what they did. They we had some injuries early on this year. Everybody got healthy at the right time, so that plays into it. And then just the girls finally like getting into gear and kind of everything falling into place. They had been working their tail off all year, but it hadn't been always, normally we'd usually have an easier path to the tournament. And then this year just was not as smooth, meaning we had some losses going in that we shouldn't have lost. And just the other teams just kind of jumping us and putting us down lower. Like we had to travel for the regional to Stanford, which is not normal. Again, that's a tough place to play. It's a really good team. So we really got tested out there with Tennessee and Stanford. But again, our girls just embraced it, um, kept a little chip on their shoulder, kept working. And man, by the time we got to the tournament, it's literally like an 18-wheeler or a train. Once you get something that's that powerful and they're all in alignment and they all want it that bad, it's really hard to stop a group of young ladies that are that trained that well, they're that strong, that mentally dialed in, and they want it that bad. They wanted to prove everybody wrong, and it was a special team to be a part of and watch. So
Yeah, it's always good to be the underdog, and it can be really, really motivating for a lot of athletes. Now, what advice would you give for young female athletes who want to play at a high level at a top 25 Division I school for any sport that they're in?
yeah, good question. I would say, number one, it's very competitive. So my first and foremost thing was like, look, don't panic if you're not where you want to be. Don't be really careful about, because that's what those club systems do. You start going, man, I'm behind and I'm not going to make it. You see a lot of in I would say in a lot of women's sports, they develop later. And so every female I've seen, their potential to grow and develop as an athlete and as a woman, there's mental, physical, and there's the game itself. Some girls blossom a lot later. Usually it's not earlier. And so I think if the more they can keep a bigger picture perspective and not so be narrow-minded and focus on like where they're at, they'll have a better shot. So I think their approach to that's huge. And then secondly, kind of what we mentioned earlier, if you're spending, I forget where I got this from, but like your age, let's say you're 12 years old, that's really the maximum amount of numbers you should be putting in your sport per week, right? So if you're 12, 13, 14, you're listening to this, or a mom is, make sure that they're not going like 16 to 20 hours of their sport. Look at what they need to be getting in from their sport, but then make that margin, create that margin over here for the physical training too. So really put a cap on that, get them some cross training, get them some one-on-one stuff, dial that back, let them develop slowly, focus more on kind of who they're becoming as a person, not what team they're making, right? So keeping a more holistic global view of this young lady and developing her. And I think again, they'll get there still if they're talented. Because what you'll end up seeing is if you don't, they'll get burned out and quit anyway. And you don't want to do that. It's just too much pressure for a young lady or any male too, any man, guy. It becomes just too much. And so the more you can keep a balanced, holistic kind of global perspective of how you develop them and be patient with it, they'll have a way better chance making it.
That's brilliant. And Donnie, I really want everyone to follow up with you and follow your podcast as well. It's amazing. Where can everyone find you and what's the name of the show?
It's a University of Texas podcast. So it's me and Joe Krozik and some of our staff. We kind of run it, but it's the team behind the team podcast. Again, you should see the Texas logo, and it's just a podcast about what we're talking about here: strength and conditioning, sports science, nutrition, mental health and wellness, and then the physical therapy piece or athletic training. That team behind the team that works with those athletes. So we interview people in all those buckets. So that's where you can find that. My Instagram is just at Donnie Maib, DonnieMaib. You can always reach out there. I have a website, donniemaib.com. And yeah, my book just came out in November. So I had a book like you that just came out called The Secret Sauce of Leadership. You can get that on Amazon. So those are the areas you can kind of find me.
I love it. And yes, definitely get Donnie's book. He knows a thing or two about leadership. So definitely a lot of wisdom in that. I'll link it in the show notes below. So be sure to check that out. And we hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you guys next time.